All right, thank you very much. As I said, I'm a PhD student in criminal law, and I'm researching the kind of punitive crime policy and the punitive penal reforms that's been happening in Sweden, especially over the last maybe 10 to 15 years. And today I'm going to focus on the way these target or impact youths. And I think an important point here is that these kind of reforms intensify. So we have youth are affected by the general increase to the level of repression in Sweden. They are also general targets of punitive legislative changes, or they become targets of general reforms. And at the end, this goes very well to what you were talking about earlier, some youths are also made special targets of contemporary crime policy. And I will try to go through all of this in about 10 minutes, I hope. So the first thing is what has happened in Swedish crime policy. I think it's kind of well known that Sweden has become increasingly repressive, but exactly how much have been done? Well, if one were to kind of try and map all of these reforms out, it would look something like this. So during the last about 13 years, we've had over 150 legislative proposals that has changed the area of criminalization, and this has also increased penalties. About 40% of all of these change the way the seriousness of crimes are assessed to make sure that they are punished more harshly. And this is not everything, I can assure you, both in the way that there are so many crimes that fall beyond the kind of core criminal law area that we know very little about. And this also does not account for changes in crime prevention, such as secret surveillance. And this has, during the last 10 years, come to have had a great effect on the number of prison months sentenced. We've seen that between 2014 and 2023, we doubled the amount of prison months sentenced per year in the district courts. And we are now on track, as the other overviews show, for a prison population which in Sweden for a long time was about 5,000 people. It is currently 8,000, and it's on track to be 40,000 people by 2034. That is per capita about the same prison population as Russia and Turkey. And yet this is not considered enough. There's currently a new reform that is planned, and it's currently waiting referral responses. This reform is supposed to achieve 16,000 more prison years per year to a cost of 16 billion Swedish crowns per year. This is also not a kind of consequence as much as it is the kind of intended results. In the directions for the investigation, it was outlined that it was supposed to raise the general level of repression more than what has been done previously. And their proposals that were presented in June of this year were mainly aimed at imposing longer and to some extent more prison sentences than is currently the case. So this is the kind of general landscape that youths in Sweden exist in. But youths have also become a general target of punitive reforms. And this is like a very short, from all of this, these are some of the ones that are aimed at youths. And I think the kind of most important ones to mention is that over time, the possibility to account for age when sentencing young perpetrators and also children have been rolled back. So currently, youths are to a much larger extent treated like adults, which also then of course means that we are currently treating adults as children, and we can't anymore kind of acknowledge the discrepancy between the possibility to control and abide by the law between young people and adults. And maybe the most radical suggestion here which is currently a draft for consultation from the Council on Legislation, is a suggestion to lower the age of criminal responsibility from 15 to 13 for a certain set amount of serious crimes. There was a proposal recently which suggested lowering it to 14. The referral responses to these suggestions were kind of unanimously against it. Still, in September, when Parliament opened this year, the government released a debate article suggesting that it should be lowered to 13 instead. But youths are then also targets of seemingly general punitive reforms. In 2023, we received some new legislation which aimed at targeting these kind of gangs or criminal networks, as they're called in Sweden. And one key proposal was that the transferring of drugs for profit should be considered so serious in and of itself that no matter the amount of narcotics transferred or possessed, the penalty should be amount to a number of months imprisonment, even for a single sale of a small quantity or possession of a small quantity of drugs for such a purpose. And in the very same investigation, they noted, as we've also talked about earlier these days, that young people are being exploited, and especially exploited in drug trafficking or in the drug trade. Their research showed that young people are under pressure to start or continue committing offenses, especially drug-related offenses. They are not allowed to stop. They are forced, and even if they have entered into this under more voluntary circumstances, relatively speaking, they are not allowed to leave. And these reasons led the government to propose a legislation criminalizing the involvement of youths in crime. But in the very same breath, they also noted that this change to the rules on or the penalty for drug trafficking or drugs or selling or possession of drugs for transfer would especially target these very young people. And then these young people were not anymore considered as exploited by the networks, but rather as representatives of them, acting on behalf of them. And this leads me to the final point, which is that some youths are made specific targets of a kind of Janus-faced penal regime. And this is quite known in the literature on Nordic exceptionalism, that it has always had two phases to it. The same system which could allow for social solidarity can also allow for a welfare nationalism, where foreigners are cast as outsiders and their crimes are made a kind of evidence of their otherness. This Barker has written on this for, as you see, very early. And we can see then that the construction of criminal networks, their members, and the seriousness of their crimes can be used as a sort of way to classify, contain, or expel certain groups as unwanted or undeserving. In the background, you see a crime policy summary, which is called Imprison and Deport. And as the concept criminal network is not legally defined in Sweden, it has in practice come to mean, and also the crime policy measures against them target people in urban environments, especially people in so-called vulnerable areas, utsatta områden. And as Nafstad and Parsa showed in their analysis, this definition is effectively racialized. The criteria for an utsatt område can operate as a signifier for a racialized population, implying that the designated problematic areas in Sweden are racialized neighborhoods, and that the racialized populations within them are defined as a problem by the government and for the police of unrest, disorder, crime, or propensity to crime, which in turn legitimized increasing police efforts. So what this means, if we return to this brief overview, is that we have to think about how these reforms intensify. We can see that youths are affected by the general increase to the level of repression, and they're also affected by how these reforms are based on certain representations of what the problem is and who the problem is, and how these reforms are legitimized. This has made youths targets of new penal reforms and practices to an even larger extent than adults, and especially some youth who are stuck within this frame of the crime policy problemizations. This was a very fast overview, I hope. I will finish up. I saw that there was a sign waving, so I will finish up with just a final comment, which is to see that, which is to kind of emphasize this kind of a process of how the reforms intensify and how that also then shapes what youths are made measures for repressive reforms, and as they are made measures of repressive reforms, that impacts policing, that impacts the way we act around them in a broader sense, and this has had a kind of feedback loop effect where these are not only working in a kind of intensifying way downwards, but also in a kind of circular fashion, which is that as some youth are made special targets, and as we just talked about, more and more crime are being discovered in these areas are to an even further extent made vulnerable, and as Nafsan and Parsa talks about, also made abandoned and subject to continuous new reforms, which is then why we might end up with this kind of prison population in just a few short years. I'll finish there. Thank you so much.